This video goes through the adaptations to diet and looks specifically at dentition and gut and is for A-level biology. The first animal we're going to look at is herbivores, and they have a plant-based diet which contains a lot of cellulose and is quite difficult to digest. We're going to go through some of the adaptations that they have in order to be able to do this. Next, we're going to look at carnivores, and carnivores mainly eat animal tissues which are rich in protein and fat and are much easier to digest than herbivores, plants. Carnivores can be dogs, cats, crocodiles, like this image here, and there are over 260 living species worldwide of carnivores. And finally, omnivores. Omnivores eat a mixed diet and they need to be able to digest a wide range of foods. So bears, for example, can eat plants, insects, fish, and animals. Next, we're going to look at the skulls of both herbivores and carnivores and see how they are adapted to their nutrition. So if we look at the first skull on the left, that's the skull of a carnivore, whereas the one on the right is the skull of a herbivore. And if we look at the carnivore one in more detail, carnivores have a high protein lipid diet, and their teeth or their dentition is adapted for this. So the first thing we notice is that they have these incisors, which are these huge teeth at the front, and they are used to grip and tear the flesh of the animal that they're eating. They also have canines, and these are long and pointed and pierce the flesh, so they rip and tear the food. The third one is carnassial teeth, and these act like shears sliding past each other to rip the bone from the muscle. And carnassial teeth are only in carnivores, they're not in herbivores. And finally, premolars and molars. They're really sharp and they help cut and crush. The jaw muscle moves in a vertical plane, so up and down, and this helps to crush the food, crush the muscle of the animal they're eating. If we look at the overall adaptations for carnivores and their high protein or meat diet, they have, as we've already discussed, large canines. So you can see this lion here. He has these huge, large canines and carnassial teeth, which are only in carnivores. Their eye sockets are also located to help them enable to see prey better. They have a short gut because they do not need to be able to digest the cellulose like herbivores do, and we'll discuss this in more detail later. They have a bit of a larger stomach, and that's because they have a high protein diet, and that's important for digestion of this high protein diet. Next, we're going to look at the herbivores. So they have a plant-based high cellulose diet. And the first thing we're going to look at is the dental pad, which is the hard surface on the upper mouth, and it serves as the upper place of the teeth. The incisors, which are on the lower jaw, as opposed to the carnivores, they're on the upper jaw, and these help to cut the vegetation against the dental pad at the top. We also have premolars and molars, but this time they move in a horizontal plane, so underlocking can grind the food. The teeth are unrestricted, so they grow throughout the life of the herbivore. The diastema, which essentially is the gap between the incisors and the premolars, as indicated by the red line on the skull. And this helps the tongue to hold the plant material. So it acts as a kind of gap to let the tongue make sure the plant material stays there. They also have a loose articulation of the jaw, and this helps with the grinding of the vegetation. If we look at the overall adaptations for their plant-based diet, as we've discussed, they have non-existent or very small canines. They have strong flat molars for grinding leaves, and their teeth grow continuously throughout the life, helping to grind the plants or the vegetation. They have a very long gut for processing of cellulose, which is really hard to break down. And this is opposite of the carnivores we looked at, which had a much shorter gut because they weren't eating plants or vegetation material. Next, we're going to look at the guts of different animals to see how they're adapted. So first, we're going to look at an insectivore. An insectivore is like a mouse, as shown. And these essentially eat insects made of chitin and protein, which is really easily digestible. If you look at the yellow image, we're going to compare them across different animals, but they have a very short intestine. They have no cecum as well, which is part of the large intestine. And that's because the food is really easy to digest, so it doesn't need a lot to break it down. If we compare this to non-ruminant herbivores, these animals have a high fiber cellulose content, which is really difficult to digest. And because of that, we can already see they have a much longer small intestine. So it's the line coming out of the stomach. They have bacteria present in the cecum to digest the cellulose, but because the bacterial digestion is happening after the ileum, the products are not absorbed. So the ileum is inside the small intestine, and that's where the main site of absorption happens. So it means that the products cannot be absorbed for this non-ruminant herbivore. If we look at a ruminant herbivore, which is an example of a cow, they have 4-chamber stomachs. So you probably heard of a cow having 4 stomachs. Their bacterial digestion is before the ileum, so they can absorb the product. So it's before the small intestine, so the cellulose can be broken down and it can be absorbed by ruminants, which is different from non-ruminants. And as you can see on the image shown in yellow, they have a 4-chamber stomach, but they have a much longer small intestine and large intestine, and this is to help with the digestion of and absorption of the cellulose. If we now look at a carnivore has mostly a meat and protein fat diet, which is a lot easier to digest. So it has no cellulose, which we've discussed. So there's no need for a long digestive system, and you can see by the image shown in yellow that it's a lot of a shorter system, and it has a slightly larger stomach, which we've already discussed. Next, I'm going to talk about a bit more detail about ruminants' digestion, just to walk through the 4 chambers of the stomach. So we're going to look at the 4 chambers of the stomach and the order of the digestion. So if we start with forming of the cud, so grass is mixed with the saliva and chewed before it's swallowed. So this happens step 1. A lot of mechanical digestion's going on, and this is by the cow essentially crushing the food with its teeth. Next, the cud essentially enters the rumen, and the cud is digested by microbes. And cellulose digesting bacteria helps break down this really tough cellulose in the grass. And this produces carbon dioxide and methane, which is why sometimes people associate cows with farting because of the methane. Next, the food kind of enters the reticulum, and the rumen and the reticulum work very closely together. The cud is regurgitated and goes back to the mouth to be essentially reviewed or reswallowed, rechewed. Next is the oomycin, where water is absorption is here. The food is also broken down into smaller pieces, and this is the smallest stomach of the cow. Next is the abomasum, and this is called the true stomach of the cow. And this is a key site of protein digestion. So remember, digestion's happening. The larger molecules are getting broken down into smaller molecules here. And then finally, the small intestine. So the products of digestion are absorbed into the blood and into the small intestine. So we've gone through the differences between herbivores and carnivores and their different adaptations in terms of dentition and gut. And then we've looked at a bit more detail in terms of the ruminants and the 4 chambers, the order of how they digest food.